Where does the Mets starting rotation stack up compared to the Phillies and the Braves? We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, over the last couple of shows, I have been comparing the Mets to the Braves and the Phillies, trying to decide which of these teams should be considered the favorites heading into the 2025 season. How I've been doing that, I've been giving each starting player for these teams a grade on a scale of 1 star to 5 stars. And then we're putting them all together and I'm ranking position groups. So the first show was ranking the top infields in this division. And I had the Mets as the best infield in the National League East. Then I went to outfields, and the Mets and the Braves were very close. Braves, I gave a slight edge. Phillies were not even close. And then I compared the catcher and the DH on the outfield episode as well, factoring that into the mix, and then putting together an entire score for each of these three teams on their lineups. And when we did that, as you can go back and listen to those episodes or watch those episodes, I came away with the conclusion that the Mets and the Braves were pretty much at a dead heat atop this division, and the Phillies lagged behind. But now as we get to their rotation, this is where the Phillies stand out, and the Phillies can just pitch themselves to another division title. When it comes to my star ranking system for pitchers here, 5 stars means an ace. So Zach Wheeler is a clear cut, no doubt about it, ace. He is one of the best pitchers in baseball. At justbaseball.com, where I write, we ranked our top 25 starting pitchers, and for my personal rankings that went into our vote as a panel, I had Zach Wheeler as the best pitcher in baseball because of what he does year over year, being remarkably consistent in the regular season, and then jumping out and being one of the best playoff performers that we've seen, arguably in MLB history. So Zach Wheeler, 5 stars. 4 stars are frontline starting pitchers. Guys who are going to take the ball, you can count on, and they're going to give you great production. Aaron Nola, to me, fits in that 4-star bucket. He is an absolute workhorse. Last year, he pitched to a 3.57 ERA, came 2 outs away from his 4th 200-inning season in his career. He has not missed a start in 7 seasons. You can pretty much just book it that he's going to get to 190 innings. He's going to be somewhere between a 3.3 and a 4.4, but he's going to give you innings along the way, and it's just going to be a matter of how the luck was in his favor or not when it comes to the ERA, but he's as consistent as they come. Then we get to Christopher Sanchez and Ranger Suarez, guys that could be frontline pitchers, but for my scale here, I have a 3-star guy as a middle of the rotation arm. A solid middle of the rotation arm is 3 stars. Again, 4 stars is frontline, and I think for both Christopher Sanchez and Ranger Suarez, they fall into that bucket where, yeah, they could be frontline starters. If not, if their streakiness can lead to, particularly Ranger Suarez's case, some bad months, they might fall a little bit below that. Not to mention, for Christopher Sanchez, I'm not entirely sure that a 1-year sample size means that he'll always be a frontline guy. That's what he was last year. He pitched to a 3.32 ERA in 31 starts, got over 180 innings pitched, was an all-star, started game 2 of the NLDS because they liked his home road splits. They liked him pitching at Citizens Bank. So they had Aaron Nola take game 3 at Citi Field. Obviously, that all worked out great for the Mets. But getting back to Christopher Sanchez, to me, I'm putting him between 3 and 4 stars at 3.5. And the same goes for Ranger Suarez, because while Sanchez was a notch above him by the end of last season, the beginning of last season, Ranger Suarez had a stretch first couple months of the year where he was pitching to an ERA that was sub 2. He started to fall off. That's why by the first half, by the All-Star break, his ERA was 2.76. After the All-Star break, he pitched to a 5.65 ERA, also dealt with some injuries. Ends up, pitching well in the playoffs still. He's got a career 3.42 ERA. I can't just say, oh, he's a solid middle of the rotation arm and not anything better than that. I'm giving him that 3.5 stars. And then that brings me to Jesus Luzardo, who is their new addition as their 5th starter. a guy they traded for from the Marlins, who was unbelievable in 2023 when he pitched to a 3.58 ERA and nearly 180 innings pitched, looked the part of a potential frontline starter, and then he got hurt again. 12 starts, 5 ERA last year. I don't know if he's going to be healthy, and I don't know if he's going to be effective. So I can't even say for sure solid middle of the rotation arm. The way this scale goes, solid back of the rotation starter is a 2. I think the volatility here, I can't say he's going to pitch like a 5 starter if he's healthy, but if he's banged up, he might. So I ultimately decided in a ranking, where 5 stars is the best and I guess 0 would be the worst. I stuck him right in the middle. I got him at 2.5 stars for now. So that's where I have the Phillies rotation. And you combine 5 stars for Wheeler, 4 stars for Nola, 3.5 for Sanchez and Suarez, 2.5 for Jesus Luzardo. And then you have to factor in depth. And I'm grading depth on a scale of 5 as well. And for the Phillies, you got Taijuan Walker, who's going to be back in their bullpen until a rotation spot opens up. And then you have one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, Andrew Painter. Beyond that, you have Mick Abel as a guy that's a prospect, but a guy who's starting to drop in prospect rankings. He sort of factors into the mix. I don't think the Phillies have great depth, but they have a potential, unbelievable starting pitcher on the table with Andrew Painter. So that's going to knock up their depth rating a little bit. I'm giving them 2 out of 5, which brings the score altogether to 20.5 out of 30 possible points for the Phillies rotation. How does that compare, though, to the Atlanta Braves? Here's the thing with the Braves. I think their 1 through 4 could be just as good, if not better, than the Phillies. Because if they get Spencer Strider back, and he looks like the Spencer Strider of old, and you have the reigning NL Cy Young and Chris Sale, and you have a guy in Spencer Schwellenbach coming off a great rookie season, and a guy who just made that transition from reliever to starter last year, Ronaldo Lopez, who pitched to a 1.99 ERA, put those 4 guys together, you're not going to find many rotations better in baseball. But how is Lopez going to do in year 2 back in the rotation? What does Spencer Schwellenbach's sophomore season look like? And what's the health of Chris Sale, who's in his mid to late 30s? What's the health of Spencer Strider coming off the internal brace procedure? It's not quite the Tommy John, but it is still an elbow operation. And he's not going to be ready for opening day. What's that look like? When it comes to grading these guys out, I got Chris Sale at 4.5 stars. I couldn't give him the full 5-star treatment of a Zach Wheeler, so I put him a notch below. I have Spencer Strider at 4 stars. If he's healthy, he's as good as anybody in baseball, but that if he's healthy thing has to knock him down a star for me. But I couldn't knock him down any further than that because if all goes well, this guy's going to be lights out. Schwellenbach, I put him in the same bucket as Christopher Sanchez and Ranger Suarez. Phillies fans might not like it, but man, remember how well Schwellenbach looked against the Mets down the stretch of the season? He looked lights out, and I think there is a frontline starter in there, but because he doesn't have the track record, he gets 3.5 stars instead of the 4. Ronaldo Lopez, I'm putting him right in that same bucket as well. He pitched like a frontline starter last year, but it was 135 innings. Can he get to 160 innings? That's a question. And what does the ERA end up looking like? The expected ERA for Ronaldo Lopez last year was 3.94. So he was a little bit fortunate with how everything worked out, according to some of the advanced numbers, but I still trust that he's going to be a good pitcher. So again, I put that top 4 for the Braves up against the Phillies, but then we talk about depth, and that's what I want to get into next. How does the depth impact the Braves rotation? Because there are some injury question marks at the very, very top. What happens if Sale or Strider's not available and everyone gets bumped up a peg? Do they have the depth to cover it? I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to compare the Mets to these teams in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money. You can start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. Managing money through a partner is smoother than ever, as you can track shared and personal accounts. You can set goals and you can stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. We still need to keep on pushing closer and closer to that goal. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Let's talk about the back end of the rotation for the Atlanta Braves. Grant Holmes is going to start the season as their number 4 starter, will eventually be their number 5 starter when Spencer Strider is healthy. Holmes last year pitched to a 3.58 ERA, mostly out of the bullpen, in 68 in the third innings pitched. But if you remember down the stretch, we saw him a couple times against the Mets, and he looked really good. He's been great in spring so far, so I think he's going to be a very serviceable back of the rotation starter. So you know what? I'm giving him the full 2 stars as a good back-end guy. Now we talk about the depth. Ian Anderson could be back in this rotation after 2 years out of it. He struggled in 2022, then got Tommy John in 2023. I believe he's out of options, so that would be one reason to make sure he makes the team. It might be in the final spot in the bullpen because so far, not good in spring. 18 walks in 17 innings, only 8 strikeouts. Pretty bad ERA as well. I think it was over 7. So rough go of it. Actually, you know what? His ERA might have been better than that now that I'm thinking back to it. I should not just give bad information here. I didn't mark that on my notes, but let's check real quick. Yeah, somehow a 2.65 ERA, but again, those walk numbers are atrocious. I'm almost going to check it out because I got those from Fangraphs. I want to make sure I'm right on the walks because, 18 walks. That's just brutal. Yeah, I don't trust him as a depth arm. The guy that might make this rotation instead is AJ Smith-Shawver. We've heard his name for a while, a top prospect that has great stuff, but he hasn't quite solidified himself in a big league rotation. He also has yet to get over 90. Actually, last year he just barely got over 90 innings pitched, but he's never gotten to 100 innings pitched in a season. So how much can you count on AJ Smith-Shawver? He's looked much better in spring, 18 strikeouts in 12 innings with just 3 walks. But it's hard to count on that. And then beyond Smith-Shawver and Ian Anderson, you got Hurston Waldrop, Dylan Dodd, and Bryce Elder, guys that are 4A pitchers at this point. I wouldn't like any of them in my rotation. So I look at the depth and I say, all right, Ian Anderson, is he better or worse than Taijuan Walker? He's worse. Smith-Shawver, is he better or worse than Andrew Painter? He's worse. He's not as good of a prospect. I don't even know if he's still considered a prospect based on how long he's been sort of lingering around here. But when it comes to depth, I sort of hate the Braves' depth. I give them 1 out of 5. It's just, it's not a deep rotation. I think they're going to feel the loss of 2 guys that gave them consistent innings year over year over year over year, and that's Charlie Morton and Max Fried. Those guys are gone, and they're just planning to replace them with Spencer Strider coming off an injury, and I guess a full year of Spencer Schwellenbach, and hopefully Ronaldo Lopez, and then counting on maybe Grant Holmes to make that transition. It's not a deep rotation, and that hurts them. Overall, you put together the 4.5 stars I gave Sale, 4 stars for Strider, 3.5 for Schwellenbach and Lopez, 2 for Holmes, 1 for their depth, gave them 18.5 out of 30 points, 2 behind the Phillies when it comes to the rotation. All of this brings us to the Mets, and with the Mets, I'm going to do the inverse that I've done with the last 2 teams. We're going to start with the depth because that's the strength of this team, just the amount of starting pitchers they have. They're going to miss Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea to start the season. So we're already starting to see the depth with Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill projected to make this rotation. Paul Blackburn pitching out of the bullpen. That's your depth. You still have one of the best pitching prospects in baseball and Brandon Sproat waiting in the wings. Blade Tidwell's up in AAA. He could make an impact this year. You still have beyond that, Jonah Tong and Nolan McLean in the upper levels of the Mets farm system. So I like the Mets pitching depth a lot, especially because eventually you're going to get Manaea and Montas back. So when we talk about depth, the way I'm going to structure the Mets for this exercise, the 5 starters I will rank: Kodai Senga, Clay Holmes, David Peterson, because Manaea's injury is not as serious, I'm going to give Manaea a rating. He could pitch before Spencer Strider. I gave Strider a rating, so that's why I'm going to rate Manaea. And then I'll put Griffin Canning as the 5. The depth is McGill, Blackburn, Montas, which is sort of this fun wild card that's going to enter the fold maybe at the end of May, depending on that injury. We'll see. And then Brandon Sproat. Look at the Mets' depth. How many teams in Major League Baseball have 8 MLB starters that they felt good about going into camp? Because that's what the Mets had. They lost 2. They still have 6. That's why one's going to start in the bullpen. Not many teams. Then you add in a farm system that is improving with a top pitching prospect that's in AAA and Brandon Sproat that's a top 40 prospect in baseball, top 30 depending on the outlet. To me, the Mets' depth is as good as it can be, except for the lack of frontline depth. So I really struggle with, okay, how do I rate it, right? How do I rate the Mets' depth compared to these teams? But again, you compare the Phillies and the Braves, they're sort of counting on Andrew Painter to be that 6th starter that can slide in at some point. The Braves are going to be counting on Smith Shawver. Brandon Sproat is 9th on the Mets depth chart. He's so far down, and he's right there in the same type of a bucket as far as what upside he presents, but how unproven he is compared to Painter and Shawver. They're all 3 of these guys that are just crazy wild cards. Then beyond that, again, the Mets, instead of having Bryce Elder or Ian Anderson making a start when a couple guys go down, it's going to be McGill and Canning because that's what we're seeing right now. For the Phillies, a couple guys go down, all of a sudden Taijuan Walker is in your rotation. Maybe McAble's in your rotation. So I think the Mets' depth does set them apart from these other 2 teams, and it gives them sort of a higher floor to withstand injuries during the regular season. Not going to give them 5 stars or 5 points because I think that's giving them a little too much credit, but I still got to give them 4. I think this depth does matter. And ultimately, it's the saving grace for this rotation, as we'll learn in the next segment. I'm going to rank the Mets' 5 starting pitchers and then talk about the final results of this exercise in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies you need from the site that's made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need to deliver fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, so now is your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order at supplyhouse.com. If you are an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You also say partner our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. And once the season starts, we'll have the lineup graphics sent to you each day so you know who's in the Mets starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's go through the Mets' 5 starters that I laid out. We're going to open it up with Kodai Senga. He should be your ace if he's right, and I think he is close to a bona fide ace, but for the purposes of grading this fairly and not having bias, we have to factor in the injury-plagued year. We have to. And so I can't give him 5. I can't give him 4.5 stars because that's the same rating I gave Chris Sale. I am comfortable giving him 4 stars out of 5 because I'm going to give him some of the benefit of the doubt here because he's gone through spring healthy. We'll knock on all the wood for that. But for me, Kodai Senga, 4 out of 5 stars. Clay Holmes, your opening day starter. Plenty of upside. There's a chance he's a frontline guy this year. I could see it happening, but he's still making that transition from reliever to starter. And so I can't just blindly give him 4. I can't even give him the same 3.5 stars I gave Ronaldo Lopez because he already did it for a year. So we're going to settle in and say that Clay Holmes is going to be a solid middle of the rotation arm. He gets 3 stars. Same goes for David Peterson. I don't think I got to spend a lot of time on that. David Peterson is a really good middle of the rotation starter. Is he a frontline guy? Does he have the potential to pitch to a sub-3 ERA? He just did it. But I don't think you'd feel great about David Peterson starting game 1 or game 2 of a playoff series. If he starts game 4 or even game 3, you feel a little bit better about it. So I think middle of the rotation makes sense. We're going to give him 3 stars out of the 5. Manaea is a wild card. If healthy, last year we saw him pitch like the Mets ace. And I would be tempted to give him 4 stars if he was completely healthy right now and he looked like himself in spring. He's not healthy. So I'm going to knock him a little bit, and I think he deserves to be in a similar spot as Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez, other left-handed starting pitchers. So I'm going to give him 3.5 stars here out of the 5. Finally, Griffin Canning as the Mets, for now, 4th starter, but 5th starter, whatever it is. He seems locked into that spot until Manaea and Montas come back, and even then, the Mets are going to go to a 6-man rotation. So he could be one of the 6. If Tyler McGill outperforms him, the 2 guys come back healthy. Yeah, there's a world that Canning loses his rotation spot. But for now, I feel pretty good about where Griffin Canning's at and the Mets' ability to get the most out of him. He's our jersey bet for the year. If you know, you know. But anyway, when it comes to his rating, I can't rate him below Grant Holmes for me. So I got him at 2 stars. So you put all of it together. 4 stars for Senga, 3.5 for Manaea, 3 for Peterson, 3 for Holmes, 2 for Canning, and then a 4-star or a 4-point rating out of 5 for the depth. That does knock the Mets up a little bit to 16.5 out of 20. The Braves, again, I had, 16.5 out of a potential score of 30. The Braves I had at 18.5. The Phillies 20.5 on my scale. And I think that's a fair way to divide up these rotations. But I think the Mets are closer to the top 2 than many might give them credit for because their depth is so much better. They have so many arms that can factor in. And I think what David Stearns would tell you, not that he'd reveal his secrets or his strategy to everybody, but I think he looks at the gap between a middle of the rotation arm and a 5 starter. And I think for him, that gap is nowhere near as large as the difference from a back end solid big league starter to a quad A depth starter guy that's just not quite big league caliber. I think that's the bigger gap that he views. That's what he tries to avoid. And that's why you make sure you acquire a Griffin Canning. That's why you get a Frankie Montas because say, you know what, worst case scenario, he's a back end arm that's going to eat up innings for us. Best case scenario, he's got the frontline potential if we get the absolute most out of him as they did last year. I have Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, and Manaea. So I do think depth really does help the Mets. But the Phillies might have the best rotation in baseball. The Braves can compete with that if their top 4 are all healthy and rolling. And that's obviously the same thing you could say about any team, right? Look back over the past, I'll just do since my time hosting this show. The most successful seasons for the New York Mets is when you keep your rotation healthy. 2019, my first season hosting the show. They were remarkably healthy. It was Jacob deGrom, Zach Wheeler, Noah Syndergaard, Steven Matz, Jason Vargas for a lot of the season, and then Vargas was replaced by Marcus Stroman. And that was it. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it could have been those 6 guys are the only guys that even made a start that year. It was remarkable how healthy they were, and they nearly made the playoffs. 2020, not healthy. 2021, not healthy. DeGrom was playing at an MVP level in the first half, goes down, craters your season. 2022, Mets were largely healthy. Max Scherzer, Chris Bassett, Taijuan Walker pitching way better than was it Taijuan Walker that year still? Yeah, I believe so. Taijuan Walker pitching better than expected. Who else is part of that 2022 team? Or was it Carrasco was part of it? Man, the years are starting to blend. Whereas Taijuan Walker 21. Walker might have been 21. 2022 is Scherzer, Bassett. Peterson played a role. McGill played a role. DeGrom was still in the mix. Yeah, I don't think Taijuan Walker was part of the rotation. It was mostly, getting incredible production from Scherzer, Bassett, and Carrasco, largely. if I remember right. Geez. But regardless, again, they were healthy. And so that's why you had a good rotation. 2023, the Mets rotation wasn't that unhealthy, but they did lose Jose Quintana, which I think in retrospect was a very big loss. They didn't have Justin Verlander to start the season. Scherzer had a suspension. It was a rough first half. And then obviously the fire sale. And then last year, they get incredible production from Severino, Manaea, and Quintana. And look where they ended up. So health is always going to be the big thing for these rotations. But I look at each of them, and I think the Braves have the highest combination of floor and ceiling. I think, the Braves are right there. And then the Mets are a team that is going to be predicated on their depth. But if a couple things go right, I mean, they could have a rotation that's right up there with the other two. And that is how they end up being the best team in this division, is if this rotation impresses again, that's where the Mets end up jumping way out ahead. But right now, as we look at what I've done over these past 3 shows that you've gotten to listen to or watch while I've been away at a wedding, I ranked infields. I ranked outfields. I ranked the position player groups all together. And the Mets came out with 29.5 stars when we talked about the position player ratings. The Braves were right there at 29.5. The Phillies were at 26.5. But their rotation was at 20.5, which moved into a composite score of all of it at 47. The Braves, you take 29.5, you add it to 18.5 for their rotation. They're at a score of 48. For the Mets, 29.5 plus the 16.5 brings them to a final score of 46. I'm not going to grade bullpens because bullpens are volatile and they can completely change a month into the season, as we saw last year. The Mets continuing to cycle through arms. I will say each of these teams has at least 3 or 4 arms that they can trust at the back end of their bullpens. We'll know during the season which bullpen came together the best, and that will be a big factor. But on paper, as you go into this season, the fact that I am looking at my draft here that I've been using for these 3 shows, and I got 4,000 plus words of notes on these 3 teams, and I graded 9 players in the starting lineup for each team, and I talked about the depth, and then I went to the starting rotations, and I graded all 5 starters plus the depth, and you're just looking at all these rosters and combing through them with that fine-tooth comb. The fact that through this little grading system I came up with, they're all separated by 2 points, and it's Braves 48, Phillies 47, Mets 46. It shows you how close this division is. I think right now the Mets and the Braves have the best lineup in this division, and I'd give the Mets maybe even a slight edge over the Braves, but I think they're neck and neck. And the Phillies, to me, are definitely worse offensively than these other 2 teams, and they're also a lot of ways worse defensively too. Then you talk about the pitching, though, and that completely narrows the gap for the Phillies. I think still the Braves are the team to beat, and this grading sort of bore that out because they're just the best of both worlds. They're solid in a lot of different places. But the Mets lineup can absolutely bash their way to being the best in this division. The Phillies pitching can certainly pitch their way to being the best in this division. It is completely up for grabs in 2025 to see who will win the National League East. The bullpens, that's going to be a differentiating factor. How healthy these rotations are, how healthy the starting lineups are, which guys end up popping that we're not expecting on all fronts. There's a lot that'll go into the picture, but I just can't see a world, despite the most optimistic outlook on the Washington Nationals with James Wood and Dylan Cruz and CJ Abrams, and I guess it's kind of an up-and-coming rotation. As much as you can paint a rosy picture for the Nationals, I can't see them really contending for a playoff spot. And the Marlins are just so far out of it. So that's why we left those 2 teams out of these rankings. But it's clear to me through this exercise that I've gone through here, these teams are all close. And even saying the Braves are the favorite, it's not giving enough credit to a Mets team that just went to Game 6 in the NLCS, a Phillies team that's gone on a couple of deep playoff runs and just won the division. It really is anyone's division right now, those 3 teams, and it's going to be an absolute dogfight across the 162 game season. But anyway, that will be all for today's show. I appreciate all of you who've been tuning in while I have been out of town with these banked up episodes that I did breaking down the National League East. Now we got opening day coming up on Thursday. So on tomorrow's show, for those of you listening on a Sunday, I'll be recapping everything that happened while I was gone. And then we'll start to really get fired up for opening day being a few short days away. That's going to be all for the show. Again, as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on social media, Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, the link is there for you in the episode description. As always, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.